Back in 1995, a doomsday cult in Japan carried out a simultaneous attack using sarin gas on Tokyo's subway system, killing 13.
He was just a very sick, demented child in a man's body.
If I started murdering people, there'd be none of you left.
In 1995, Japanese cult leader Shoko Asahara appeared to bestow supernatural powers on a follower during an unsettling interview. While this was very disturbing to watch, what happened next to this follower changed the course of her life forever. Here are the 10 most disturbing interviews with cult leaders. Number 10. Warren Jeffs.
I ask for everyone's forgiveness.
July 2004. Brent, Warren Jeffs' nephew, filed a lawsuit claiming that he and his brother had been sexually assaulted by Jeffs in a church compound during the 1980s. What made the situation even more unsettling was that Brent's brother took his own life, unable to cope with the mental anguish from this abuse. But as crazy as that may sound, that's just a scratch on the surface of crimes committed by a man who people say is the devil in human form. Jeffs is the president of the Fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, aka the FLDS. This so-called church was a polygamous movement believing that only one person could share God's word with the faithful, and to them that person was Warren Jeffs. However, in reality, Warren here was a child molester, sex offender, and formerly one of the most wanted men in all of America. It started in 2002, when Jeffs took over from his father as the leader of FLDS. He remarried all his father's wives and tied the knot with an extra 40 women. A disturbing fact would be that Jeffs married his own daughters and nieces while molesting his entire extended family. This was a perverted beast let loose, brainwashing his followers into thinking he was a renowned man of God, while committing the gravest sins behind closed doors. By 2006, Jeffs was officially placed on the FBI's 10 Most Wanted for instituting child marriages and a host of other crimes. At the same time, he was in exile, leaving behind his 75 wives at the church's community home, which was later discovered by the police. Subsequently, he was apprehended and arrested in Nevada by a highway trooper because the license plate on his red 2007 Cadillac Escalade wasn't visible. At the time of his arrest, Jeff had 4 computers, 16 cell phones, 3 wigs, and 12 pairs of sunglasses used as disguises. He was also found in possession of more than $55,000 in cash. He was extradited to Texas, being found guilty on 2 counts of sexual assault, receiving the max sentence of life imprisonment. But it was while in prison that the real drama of his life unfolded. After failing to take his own life countless times, Jeffs claimed to have realized his mistakes and had turned to God for forgiveness. During his interview while incarcerated, he claimed that God came to visit him in his cell and drop some prophecies on him. For spiritual purification, he would get on these long, dangerous hunger strikes, pairing them with his ridiculous end-time predictions. Some say he was seeking a spotlight, others say he was mentally unstable. But whatever may be true, Warren Jeffs is a sinister cult leader the world will probably never forget. Number 9. Jim Jones.
Once you have power, you think of ways you can use your power. And Jim Jones was never at a loss of how he could use his power.
November 18, 1978, People's Temple founder Jim Jones led hundreds of his followers to a remote part of the South American nation of Guyana. Once there, after days of vigorous labor, they willingly ingested a poison-laced punch, while others were forced to do so at gunpoint. This led to the deaths of 909 people. Born on May 13, 1931, Jones experienced a troubled childhood, harboring a persistent desire for control. During his youth, he would confine his friends in a barn and conduct peculiar experiments on animals, compelling his peers to observe. As he matured, his yearning for power expanded, driving him to establish the People's Temple, a Christian church founded in Indiana. Jones preached against racism, attracting a large number of African Americans, but at the same time, his followers were being brainwashed by his teachings, and they couldn't see the troubling aspects of his personality. In 1971, Jones was accused by the media of financial fraud, physical abuse of his members, and mistreatment of children. In response to this mounting criticism, Jones invited his congregation to move with him to Guyana, where he promised to build for them a utopia-like paradise. But as we've come to realize, this was an invitation to their deaths.
How scared were you to try to escape?
I was terrified. I was waiting for a bullet to hit at any moment. I was prepared to die on that day.
At Guyana, temple members worked long days in the fields and were subjected to harsh punishments if they questioned Jones's authority. Their passports were confiscated, their letters home were censored, and some members were turned into Jones's sexual slaves. When people on the outside became concerned for their loved ones, Jones granted U.S. Congressman Leo Ryan permission to come and investigate the settlement. It was during this investigation that Jones gave an interview, claiming that he wanted the outside world to leave him and his followers in peace, and that no one was being held hostage.
People play games, friend. They lie. What can I do about lies? Are you people going to leave us? I just beg you, please leave us.
It did seem like Jones was innocent, but the true horror of this story unfolded when Jones ordered the murder of the congressman as he was leaving Jonestown, the name of the settlement in Guyana. This was because as Ryan was leaving, a bunch of temple members begged to leave with him, signifying that indeed, these people were being held against their will. And if information like that got out, the U.S. government would have come guns a-blazing, smoking out Jones and his associates. However, killing Ryan wasn't enough. Jones commanded everyone to gather in the main pavilion and commit what he termed a revolutionary act. The youngest members of the People's Temple were the first, as parents and nurses would use syringes, dropping potent mixes of cyanide, sedatives, and powdered fruit juice into the members' throats. Adults then lined up to drink the poison-laced concoction while armed guards surrounded the pavilion, making sure no one escaped. A few of these followers managed to escape and alert the police, but by the time they got to the scene the following morning, what they saw beats human comprehension. This land was carpeted with hundreds of lifeless bodies. Many people had perished with their arms around each other, with dozens of cups, syringes, and bottles all over the place. As for Jim Jones, he committed suicide by shooting himself in the head, and his body was found on an altar. To put into context how destructive this mass murder suicide was, the Jonestown Massacre stood as the largest incident of intentional civilian deaths in the United States until 9/11. It's really shocking how he convinced all those people to kill themselves. Number 8. David Brandt Berg.
We're no longer under the laws of Moses. We're no longer under the Ten Commandments. All you have to worship God today is your own.
When you hear a Christian sect named Children of God, you have to assume they're a group of devout and holy Christian worshipers. But in this case, we might be wrong. The Children of God, founded by David Berg, was essentially this communist cult with an old world idea of Christianity, recruiting new members by sleeping with them. Now in 1968, David Berg would begin this cult in Huntington Beach, California. He preached about revolutions, happiness, and the end of times. He would also talk about how God loves sex because sex is love, and Satan hates sex because sex is beautiful. But that's only the tip of the iceberg. Now this guy really liked the young girls. He explored the free love movement back in '69, encouraging adults in his cult to be intimate with young victims. And believe me when I say we don't want to know how young these victims were. And what's more interesting here is that Berg urged his female followers to indulge in flirty fishing, which is when women use sex as a method to lure outsiders to come worship in this cult. And we really don't want to go deeper into the atrocities committed by these people, so we hope you got the point. During the only available interview, Berg gave us a glimpse into his Christian belief by claiming the love of God surpasses every other Christian commandment. He says loving God is enough, and as long as people do that, all other preachings can be suppressed.
Just this one law of love fulfills all 10 and all the rest. To love the Lord with all thy heart and thy neighbor as thyself. That is the only religion that counts.
Apart from functioning as a debaucherous whorehouse disguised as a church, the Children of God remained united by the belief in an impending apocalypse. They considered themselves martyrs, endowed with the ability to rescue the world from the Antichrist. Now, for money, they would engage in street performances, and at times would beg for groceries. Shockingly, after each day, a staggering 90% of their earnings went directly into Berg's pockets. After a ton of allegations of abuse and report of misconduct started piling up against this community, the Children of God was abolished, or at least the name was. In fear of getting prosecuted, David here went into hiding for the remainder of his life until he died in 1994. Though he died of natural causes, his cult branched out and was succeeded by various individuals in different parts of the world. A very harmful doctrine floating out there, afflicting the minds of the innocent. Number 7. David Koresh. February 28, 1993. The Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, aka the ATF, attempted to raid the Branch Davidian compound in order to execute a search warrant. However, this turned out to be a bitter gun battle, killing 5 ATF agents and 5 Branch Davidians, leaving hundreds more injured. The man at the center of this massacre was David Koresh. Born on August 17, 1959, this man considered himself a messiah. He was the leader of the Branch Davidians, a splinter group of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, using his influential position to propagate controversial religious teachings and engage in heinous crimes. Among these crimes was his insistence that children should fear him. He would eventually marry many women within his Branch Davidian community, and disturbingly, some of these women were not of legal age. But these aren't even the worst of his crimes. An investigation by the FBI showed that Koresh and his followers were converting semi-automatic rifles into fully automatic ones. This was the premise to launch a siege on their compound, but in turn resulted in one of America's most devastating massacres. Now, before all this happened, Koresh invited some journalists to the compound, giving the nation a first look behind their walls. But more importantly, he blatantly denied accusations of committing adultery with his wife, Rachel, and all the other sexual abuse claims stacked against him.
Have you committed adultery? No, I don't commit adultery.
And it makes nobody's business whether we have a gun or not at this place.
Now, on the morning of February 28, 1993, a 51-day standoff between the Davidians and the FBI, which had taken over from the ATF, ensued. The FBI would go into many tactics breaching that compound, including playing this horrible loud music on speakers 24/7, trying to induce sleep deprivation in members, and took part in 60 hours of negotiation with Koresh to get into this place. Outside, FBI assembled what has been called probably the largest military force ever gathered on a civilian suspect in American history. 10 Bradley tanks, 2 Abrams tanks, 4 combat engineering vehicles, 668 agents in addition to 6 U.S. Customs officers, 15 U.S. Army personnel, 13 members of the Texas National Guard, 31 Texas Rangers, and 18 Waco police officers. Finally, on April 19th, the FBI raided the compound, using military-grade weaponry to shoot down and kill anyone in sight. After a crazy fire, 76 out of 85 Branch Davidians were killed, including Koresh, who died of a gunshot wound to his head. To some, this siege was putting an end to this crazy cult, but to others, it was the consequences of federal aggression. Whatever side you're on doesn't change the fact that David here left an indelible mark in America's history, one denoted by his innocent yet blind followers. Number 6. Anne Hamilton Byron.
Children ever hit?
Oh, I can never say we went out to hit the children, never.
Never went out to hit them, but were
never
they hit?
Hit them, no.
You never hit?
That was Anne, blatantly lying in this exclusive interview about the deeds of her notorious Australian cult. Born in 1921, Anne had a rough upbringing. Her father, unable to find a job, couldn't provide for his family, while her mother died in an asylum after being diagnosed as a paranoid schizophrenic. That pushed Anne into foster care, making her spend most of her childhood in different foster homes. But a real tragedy to her story came when she lost her first child in a fatal car accident. People can deal with grief in different ways, but what Anne did is beyond imagination. She became a yoga teacher, grabbing an audience of middle-aged Melbourne housewives. From there, she would dive into Eastern religions, teaching her students, or should I say followers, about a mix of Hinduism, Buddhism, and Christianity. At this point, Anne was so out of her mind that she thought herself to be on the same level as Christ, Buddha, and Krishna. She was brainwashed by her own teachings, and so were her followers. She had them under her spell. They gave her anything she wanted: their money, homes, even their children. And while you're trying to wrap your head around that, things got worse. Anne had manipulated followers to bring not only their children to her home, but also to illegally grab as many children off from the streets. In total, she had 28 children in her custody. To make things worse, their identities were altered. False birth certificates were provided, their last names were changed to Hamilton Byron, and their hair was dyed blonde. All of this was done in an attempt to convince them that they were a related family. However, all it took was one victim to put an end to this sadistic cult. Her name? Sarah Moore.
Why did you start to take in the children?
I love children.
Some of the beatings were very vicious. I'm quite surprised that people survived them.
In 1987, Sarah was expelled from the group due to her rebellious behavior against Anne. Consequently, Sarah went to the police and a raid was conducted. The children were taken into protective custody, and Anne fled the country before eventually being arrested in 1993 on charges of fraud. But the drama continues. After subjecting these people to emotional trauma and chronic substance abuse, Anne served almost no jail time and was only ordered to pay damages to numerous individuals for psychological abuse. She was then taken to a nursing home where she was diagnosed with severe dementia, unaware of the pain and suffering she had caused so many individuals. But more painfully, Sarah died in 2016 at the age of 46, while Anne herself died 3 years later at 97. Number 5. Shoko Asahara.
Shoko Asahara was the first of 13 cult members scheduled to be hanged for the attacks on the subway, which killed 13 people and injured more than 6,000.
March 20th, 1995. Several packages of deadly sarin gas were set off in the Tokyo subway system, killing 12 people and injuring over 5,000. The perps belonged to a cult called Aum Shinrikyo, which translates to the Supreme Truth. Now, this cult had thousands of followers all over Japan, believing in this doomsday prophecy. The Supreme Truth had collected personal assets of new cult members, having well over $1 billion stashed away. The leader was a partially blind man named Shoko Asahara. Now, this guy had long hair and a long beard, wore bright robes, and often meditated while sitting on satin pillows. He claimed to be the second coming of Jesus, having the ability to travel through time, and could transfer supernatural powers to people. In one of his many disturbing interviews, Asahara demonstrated this claim by seemingly gifting an attendee superpowers. And while she's not shooting fire out of her eyeballs or anything weird, Asahara began plotting his apocalypse with sarin gas, a lethal gas invented by Nazis and by far one of the most lethal ever known to man. On the morning of the incident, his cult members systematically released this gas on 5 trains in the Tokyo subway system. While the impact of the attack was huge, it backfired massively on Asahara and his followers. Japanese authorities raided the Supreme Truth compounds across the country. They made substantial arrests, but couldn't find Asahara. At one camp at the base of Mount Fuji, police found tons of chemicals used to produce sarin gas. They would also find plans to buy nuclear weapons from the Russians. At another camp, they found Hideo Murai, one of the top leaders. But as he was being taken into custody, he was stabbed to death by an assassin who blamed him for the poison gas attack. May 16, 1995, Asahara was found and arrested in yet another secret room in their Mount Fuji compound. Along with scores of other top leaders, Asahara was charged with 27 counts of murder in 13 separate indictments. He was found guilty of 13 charges, consequently given the death sentence. July 6, 2018, Asahara was executed along with 6 other cult members. His final words were for his remains to be gifted to his 4th daughter. And at that point, it was clear that his baseless doomsday predictions had finally come true, but on a much smaller and more personal scale than he had envisioned. Number 4. Rod Farrell.
Power. It equates to the very foundation of existence. It's the communion.
I asked her, I said, since you've spoken so much about killing your parents over the past year, I was like, do you still want me to?
And what did she say?
She said, yeah.
November 25th, 1996. Naomi Ruth Queen and Richard Wendorf were found by their daughter, Jennifer Wendorf, beaten to death in their home. The perps were 2 members of a secret vampire cult, Rod Farrell and Howard Scott Anderson. But the journey to committing this heinous crime began with Farrell's disturbing childhood and his mother's love for vampires. Born on March 28, 1980, Roderick Justin Rod Farrell grew up in Murray, Kentucky, living with his high school attending mother. His father left to serve in the Army while his mom, Sandra Gibson, turned to sex work to put food on the table. Despite her efforts to provide him with a good life, Sandra's influence on her son resulted in his eventual incarceration. She would introduce him to one of her favorite hobbies, a tabletop game called The Masquerade, centered around vampires. Now in this game, players would take a role of a vampire and face challenges, like managing their hunger level and dealing with vampire hunters. Farrell became captivated, immersing himself into the character of an ancient vampire lord named Visago. Before long, he started adopting Visago's persona as his own, and he became firmly convinced that he was a 500-year-old vampire. As he got older, he started drifting from his mother, spending most of his time acting out scenes from his vampire fantasies, cutting himself, tasting his own blood, and even forming a clan with another teen vampire wannabe named Jaden Murphy. But here's where things got interesting. Farrell separated from Murphy's so-called clan to form his own with his friends, Howard Scott Anderson, Dana Cooper, Farrell's then-girlfriend Charity Kesey, and an integral member of this story, Heather Wendorf. Wendorf had convinced Farrell that her parents were mistreating her and that she disliked him. Farrell, believing it was his duty to save the damsel in distress, called upon his clan to put an end to Wendorf's suffering by killing her parents. On the night of the incident, Richard Wendorf, 49, was asleep on his couch and his wife, Ruth, was in the shower. Farrell and his accomplice, Howard Scott Anderson, entered the home through the unlocked garage. They picked up a crowbar, the murder weapon, and proceeded to strike Richard 22 times in the head, killing him instantly. They would then find Ruth, who ran out of the shower upon hearing the noises from the living room. It's important to note here that the initial plan was to taunt the parents, steal their car, and drive off. However, Farrell took LSD that night, and when that kicked in, he became inclined to kill. After committing the gruesome act, which Heather Wendorf herself wasn't aware of, the group fled the city but were caught 4 days later. On February 12, 1998, Farrell pled guilty to the murders, asserting that the other members of his group were innocent, except for Scott, who was deemed an accessory. Farrell was found guilty, initially being sentenced to death. However, because he was a minor, his sentence was later commuted to life without the possibility of parole. In the early years of his sentence, Farrell maintained a vampiric persona, claiming to be a spawn of the devil. Some say he was fake and trying to get into the medical facility, but it didn't work. And once that strategy failed, the Vampire Act was abandoned, and Farrell continues to fight for his freedom to this day. Number 3. Keith Raniere.
Both the devil and the saint should be able to get the exact same treatment under our justice system.
This is unquestionably one of the most recent and bizarre cases involving a sex cult operating under the guise of a private company. The individual at the center of this is Keith Raniere, who'd been convicted of engaging in a range of criminal activities, including human trafficking, sexual offenses, and fraud. Despite the legal verdict, he adamantly maintains his innocence. This prompts the question, what's the truth behind his actions? And how much of it aligns with or contradicts the media narrative? To unravel this, let's rewind to 1998, when the entire saga began with the establishment of a private company known as NXIVM. On the surface, this company would present itself to the outside world as something offering seminars in human potential development. However, behind closed doors, it functioned as a front for criminal activities orchestrated by Rene and his close associates. Nancy Salzman, a nurse and practitioner of hypnotism, was one of them. In 2002, Rene was involved in a case that exemplified his control over individuals within the organization, mainly concerning a Mexican family where he made all three sisters his sexual partners. The eldest, Mariana, became the mother of Rene's second biological child. The middle child, Daniela, entered into a sexual relationship with Rene shortly after turning 18, having been groomed as a minor. The youngest, Camilla, talked about sexual abuse dating back to 2005 when Rene coerced her into recruiting other individuals into what can only be described as a harrowing cycle of exploitation, together with the development of severe mental health issues. Now in 2010, his evil actions started gaining spotlight. Former members and families of NXIVM clients revealed details of Rene's erratic behavior to investigate journalists. Forbes magazine was the first to shed light on his questionable conduct, before other media houses dug deeper into his affairs. One example is an article from Times Union, quoting NXIVM coaches describing students as prey for Rene to satisfy either his gambling or sexual proclivities. In 2015, Rene established a secret subgroup within NXIVM called DOS, an acronym for Dominus Obsequious Sorium. DOS operated with a hierarchy of female slaves and masters, with Rene positioned as a grand master at the pinnacle. Members of DOS faced corporal punishment, endured extreme physical conditions, and adhered to restrictive diets to meet Rene's preference for exceptionally thin women. Shockingly, all this went unnoticed in New York for decades until a courageous reporter exposed his atrocities. October 17, 2017, the New York Times published a comprehensive story outlining the abuses within DOS, including allegations of numerous murders attributed to Rene. Less than a year later, he was arrested and faced a slew of charges. The trial was chaotic, but a significant takeaway was his persistent claim of innocence. In an exclusive interview with NBC, he asserted that he was being blackmailed by an unidentified person, alleging that all the evidence and witnesses against him were being manipulated to secure a lifetime imprisonment.
Yes, I am innocent, to express. There is a horrible injustice here, and whether you think I'm the devil or not, the justice process has to be examined.
October 27, 2020, Judge Nicholas Garofis sentenced Rene to 120 years in prison and fined him $1.75 million. To begin serving that sentence, he was first transferred to the U.S. Penitentiary, Lewisburg, and then to the U.S. Penitentiary, Tucson, Arizona. And with rumors of high-ranking American political figures being a part of this depraved sex cult, many fear Rene might be in harm's way, just like Epstein was. Number 2. Charles Manson.
You don't feel guilty at all?
There's no need to feel guilty. I haven't done anything I'm ashamed of. Maybe I should have killed 500 people, then I would have felt better.
In 1968, cult leader and serial killer Charles Manson institutionalized an association to start a race war while displaying a personality similar to that of a comic villain. Born on November 12, 1934, in Cincinnati, Ohio, Charlie's early life was marred by a very troubled upbringing. His mother, barely old enough by the time he was conceived, was involved in armed robbery, leading to her imprisonment. By the age of 9, he was already breaking the law, cutting school and stealing. His appetite for crime intensified throughout his childhood, resulting in numerous stints in reform schools and facilities for troubled boys. However, that was just the beginning. In 1956, Manson got his first adult prison sentence, marking the beginning of this 11-year cycle of incarceration and release. This pattern continued until 1967 when Manson, now 32, was released from a correctional facility in Washington state. Little did the world know that Manson was about to transition from this career criminal to a notorious leader of a cult known as the Manson family. Upon his release, Manson found a niche within San Francisco's counterculture movement. Desiring attention, he became a self-styled spiritual guru, attracting vulnerable young women seeking a sense of belonging. Once he gathered these poor naive women, Manson and his newfound followers embarked on a journey up and down the West Coast before settling at LA's Spawn Ranch in 1968. Here, Manson propagated his spiritual teachings, fueled by drug use and aspirations of breaking into the music industry, which nobody had a problem with until Manson's old habits kicked in, but this time, to kill. July 1969, the first victim, musician Gary Hinman, fell prey to the Manson family in a botched robbery. Their next victims were popular actress Sharon Tate and 4 other individuals. This was followed by a murdering spree that didn't go undetected by law enforcement. October 1969, after evading authorities for 2 months, Manson and his followers were arrested on suspicion of car theft and charged with many counts of first-degree murder. It was during that indictment that his crazy theory of a race war was revealed. According to a member of the family, Charles had long preached that a race war of epic proportions was on the horizon. He told them that black people would begin attacking and killing white people, and while all that was occurring, the Manson family would hide away in caves. Then, once all the violence subsided, they would come out of these caves and rule over all who remained. Charles would even go to say that the Beatles' White Album even prophesized this, so it's pretty crazy to imagine, and kinda scary too. But anyways, January 25th, 1971, a jury found him guilty, along with his followers, Tex Watson, Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Leslie Von Houten. They were initially sentenced to death, but it was commuted to life imprisonment when California abolished the death penalty the following year. Manson spent his remaining years in the California State Prison in Cochran, where he died of natural causes on November 19, 2017, at the age of 83. And number 1, Joseph Paul Franklin.
I mean, it was just a really, bad thing to do to somebody, you know what I mean? I regret it very much and wished I could undo it.
June 8, 1980, in Cincinnati, Ohio. Franklin was lurking on an overpass with the intention of shooting the first racially mixed couple to cross his path. This guy was known to be a white supremacist, American neo-Nazi terrorist, and serial killer, aiming to spark a racial war in America. However, on that chilling night, 2 dark-skinned boys passed by, prompting Franklin to fire his rifle and ruthlessly end their lives. That unsettling incident was just one of a dozen others as Franklin pursued his sinister goal. Born on April 13, 1950, in Mobile, Alabama, Franklin's early life was marred by a turbulent household, marked by a scarcity of food and physical abuse from his mother and siblings. During his teenage years, he would join the KKK, fueling his desire to incite this racial conflict. Traversing states, he would indiscriminately target African and Latin Americans, strategically putting himself at bus stops and parks to await unsuspecting victims. On July 29, 1977, Franklin committed an act of violence by firebombing the Beth Shalom Synagogue in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Although the synagogue was destroyed, many worshippers had left early, minimizing casualties. By September 1980, this guy had killed 22 people, prompting a nationwide manhunt. Known for visiting blood banks and displaying conspicuous racial tattoos, he was apprehended on October 28, 1980, on suspicion of committing at least 6 murders in Florida. Now, despite being diagnosed as a paranoid schizophrenic and deemed unfit to stand trial, he found himself on death row until 2013, when the time for his execution arrived. The process, however, faced delays before finally culminating in his lethal injection on November 20th, 2013. Eyewitnesses saw Franklin's cold reaction during that execution, devoid of any stress, and with no final written statement. The death chamber remained silent. After the injection, Franklin blinked a few times, breathed heavily, and swallowed hard before being officially declared dead.